down into the bowels of the beast and all the wiring, you'll see there's an extra...
Just call it a beast.
Yes. There's an extra white plug there. So now, the car will start and run on the stock ECU.
Okay, all right.
So that's on the stock ECU, so that's got nothing else.
You have my attention, yeah.
Yeah, okay. You wanted it plug and play. You wanted what fallback for in case shit happens or something. I'm not entirely sure what you wanted, but so what we did is we got a core EFI here, and this is the harness that we made up for you. So that's the entire harness. That's just the tack adapter.
Okay.
So if we plug that main plug out, plug this one in. It's a bit tight. Don't she say? Stick that in there. And we get a piece of silicon pipe for the vacuum line. Hang on.
Suitably impressed so far. But that was sort of the aim and the goal, was not hacking into the standard wiring and not rewiring the car. It's not so much to be able to return it back to stock, but should there be any problems in the future,
Easier to trace.
yeah, it's
Everything runs through stock fuse boxes, stock relays, stock everything.
Yeah.
So anyone can work on it after the fact because you're literally referring to the Mazda manual and fixing anything that you ever need. So there's no special detail required.
Yeah, no separate schematic for this one. Yeah. Okay, so that's now the EFI, core EFI plugged in there. And this is the point where he crosses his fingers.
No, I've checked that enough times. A few times. So there you can hear we've got a couple of other functions on it.
All right, what else? What else do we have? This is the reason why I'm going with core EFIs, because it's more than just a piggyback system. It's more than just a chip.
Well, it's not a piggyback system at the moment, so we've just wired it in as a piggyback system so that you can retain all the factory schematics and that.
But it's not
You've
using the
got full
factory
standalone
ECU for any control.
Factory ECU is not doing anything. So what that was is similar to what you get on the new BMWs and that, where they've got like a preheat cycle when you just start the motor, just to get everything up to temperature.
Yeah.
So while the car is cold, we increase the idle control valve, reduce the timing, just to get it up to temperature nicely, and it helps with warming and drying O2 sensors. I know you're going to be running a Lambda control in the future, so all that'll help for not killing Lambda sensors because they're so cheap to replace.
Yes. I have actually just been through this, and a narrowband was even an expensive exercise.
Yeah.
So,
and the wideband is about like 6 times the price.
No, it's only twice the price.
Oh, you got ripped off.
So in the previous video, we went and replaced the narrowband Lambda on the NB, and that one was 1,200 Rand exercise without the Molex plug on it. If you're wanting to go with a nice wideband, you're looking at 6K.
So wideband you're looking at 6K because any controller is going to cost you 3.5-4 grand, and then sensors and everything on top of it, you in for at least 5 grand if you get a good deal. So unfortunately, everything's gotten a little bit pricey, and there are no cheap alternatives left. Before COVID and before chip shortages, there were a couple of cheap alternatives, and we could sort of like work around the system. But at the moment, everyone's crying because AFRs are expensive to do, and they're very critical. So it's one of those things, you've got to bite the bullets and just do it, especially if you're going turbocharged, especially you start leaning on a small motor to try and make power. So definitely a worthwhile.
But it's one of those things, like, are you prepared to spend that 6-7K now? Or you're prepared to spend 16, 17, 27K down the road when you grenade the engine? No,
realistically, you're not going to grenade the engine without it. You can do an open loop tune completely safely without any interference. The thing is, the long-term refinement that AFR sensor does is massive. Like the ability to have AFRs on data logs, if there's ever any queries or whatever, you can data log it and you can diagnose off of the data logs. Without AFR, you're just you've got no idea what it's doing.
Tuning blind.
Well, you can't tune. So even if you're looking for a problem, you don't know if it's a lean condition or a rich condition. You just don't know. If it's spark related, is it spark related? Well, what's the fueling doing? Is the fueling going lean? Is it going rich at the same points? Like there's so many cases where AFR helps you to diagnose problems. And then also the ability with the core EFI is you can data log and you can auto tune off of those data logs. So if you start doing like long runs and whatever with the car, the more data you collect, the more the tune gets refined, closer and closer to what the OEM would have done.
Okay, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, that was the auto tune, the learning capabilities of core EFI was also one of the appeals.
Look, everything, I believe every decent ECU, like every sort of like major manufacturer, has one thing in mind: to try do things as closely to how the OEM did it as possible, because the amount of resources and time and development that goes into OEM is just mega. So if you
can't compete with that.
Unfortunately, like nowadays, the way technology is going, you kind of can. Like we've got like very similar features.
Okay.
Remodeling the way that they do things to try and get consistency. ECUs have come such a long way from your old school stuff where it was just millisecond based, and the old story of like an ECU is only as good as what your tuner is.
Yeah.
Like that really is becoming something of the past. Nowadays, an ECU is as good as an ECU is, because if you've got an AFR, you can learn how to tune this car, and you can do everything yourself without ever going to a tuner quite easily, with having the right data and the right tools and the right software and stuff. Previously, that was you would open yourself up for absolute bankruptcy, because learning how to tune without any sort of tuition, you're going to pay your school fees one way or another.
The hard way. And that I'm going to go straight out on the bat here. What I know about tuning is probably dangerous at best. So that's why, as much as I wanted to do so much of this build myself, I've left and entrusted this side of things to Quintin and the guys at Core EFI to make sure that, well, the professionals handle it. I just knew it's far too complex. It's not hardware. It's the digital side of things that's
your idea from the beginning was you wanted something plug and play that was minimal cutting and hacking into the car.
Yeah.
For whichever reason it is, it's a nice thing, especially for something that you're doing DIY. If you get stuck, there's no intricate wiring diagrams that you need to learn or principles that you need to learn. You can kind of plug in the ECU and see if it starts. Give you a Mazda base map, it's going to start and it's going to run.
Yeah.
The only difference is now what we've done is we've wired it in slightly more than what a plug and play is.
Yeah.
And the reason was we just couldn't get that plug set to do a plug and play. Otherwise, we would have unplugged the main ECU and plugged in the core EFI via a little patch lead, and then the same thing happens. Unfortunately, those connectors and whatever aren't always available as an option to do plug and plays, and then we have to resort to this sort of thing. And the car kind of has to come to us,
especially when you go with a slightly older vehicle, or a slightly less common vehicle in the country. There isn't the same sort of support. If we were talking about a VW Polo or something of the sort, there'd be parts available.
The same thing, like an NA6 is like so easy. Like there's nothing to an NA6 because millions of people have done it. The problem with this one is like it's kind of like a crossbreed between an NA6, but they were already like on the NB sort of path. So there's so many compromises between systems, and then they had ABS with it. So there's extra modules and stuff. So it made the installation a little bit more complicated than just plug and play. Like certain things needed to be tested and needed to be confirmed. Everything works and there's no issues now. But for DIY first install, maybe not ideal if you've got no experience.
Yeah. So that's what. I left it to you, and it's and I've placed all my trust in this man here.
Well, at least we made it plug and play, so if you don't like it, you can give it back. It's fine.
Happy days. Okay, fantastic. All right,
so I'm going to plug in the ECU. So I haven't done cold start on it yet, so let's quickly do a bit of cold start tuning. You can see what it looks like, and I can explain to you like what it can do and what it can't do, and give you some examples, but then you can drive it home.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, let's get into that.
What we've done is we've added in scaling for boost, so when you add the turbo, you can drive it around on this map. If you start going into boost, it's just going to drown it in fuel, but it'll be a safe condition. You'll very quickly realize that it doesn't want to boost untuned, but nothing bad will happen. We've set up boost cuts on it as well on the protection side of things to make sure that you don't go into anything that's going to hurt the motor. Same with the timing. We've got the timing scaled up for boost, so even if it rolls into boost pressure, we're going to be taking timing out under boost to make sure that you're not going to detonate or do anything funny. I've literally got clients that have done test burnouts and stuff on a bass tune like this without like hurting stuff. So I wouldn't recommend it, but some people you just can't.
You can't stop them.
You can't stop them. I'll give you a clip. Okay. So let's get it started, and you can see what it looks like on the gauge interface. So there we are, everything's running. Intake temps, air temps, water temps, everything's reading nicely. And it's idling. Let's go to warm-up enrichment. It's pretty much at the end of the warm-up enrichment there, which is about alright. So I'm going to set it up a few degrees more. So I have done some cold start on it, but that should be perfectly fine. And now we can just leave it to warm up to temperature. Once it's at temperature and there's no funny conditions, then she's good to go.
All right, I just want to ask, the timing signals that we're pulling here, where are we pulling the timing signals from?
So the timing, base timing reference we're taking from the CAS, so the trigger on the back of the cam. That gives us home position, that gives us all of the timing, so that we can map exactly where the spark needs to happen and where it needs to occur. The signal on this car is very nice and very clean, obviously because of that high res trigger at the back. So
it was a bit of a concern of yours, was it not?
It was
that it wasn't going to be high enough resolution.
So at the moment, we've checked it with the timing lights. At idle, where it's sitting here, we've got about a 3 to 4 degree drift, which is fine. I mean, like, it's pretty consistent. When I say it's got a 3 degree drift, that's below 800 RPM. Once you go above 1,200, 1,400 RPM, it stabilizes down to about a 1 degree drift, which is as good as you're going to get from any missing tooth wheel. So completely happy with that. And zero noise, zero trigger loss. If we go here, let me show you. If we go onto the system data and we look at sync losses. So that gauge, every time the ECU loses signal or loses sync, that gauge is going to count one thing. And like as we rev it, zero sync losses, zero signal interference. It's as happy as it could be. Like, there's absolutely no faults with it, like no concerns whatsoever.
Brilliant.
Yeah, lucky.
Lucky or good?
No, lucky. When it comes to 20-year-old cars, you never know. Like, this is what I try and tell people. In theory, it's very simple, but then you've got to understand, you're working with a car. And if it can mess you around, it will mess you around, because it can mess you around.
And when you take a look at the Odo, and the Odo sits there and reads 220 plus, it's had time for gremlins to creep in.
So with this one specifically, especially because it's a little bit low in power, because it's a little bit low in power,
very low in power.
So there's this belief in the industry for some people where they take engines that make really little power, and it's like at the end of its lifetime and it's a little bit weak, and then they turbo it and then they last forever because the ring gaps are worn out and all sorts there. No, you're laughing. And I've seen people that drive them like that till the end of days, and then the next person will rebuild the motor brand new and it'll go out 2 weeks later and they'll be knackered. So yeah, it's a lucky packet. Like
that sounds like a 20 valve.
Yeah, it does. Which 20 valve though?
Which one? Yeah, which one?
Yeah, so there we go. Like, we'll just warm it up till it gets up to temperature, make sure the fans switch on.
Okay, so what are we looking to achieve here now?
So I'm looking for funny spots of transient response that you don't really get to on the dyno, that you might have like small stumbles, specifically in the very low RPM range, because people like to putt around saving petrol. And on the dyno we like to rev it out
like to be at water,
push it and whatever. Yeah. So sometimes the small transient sections that you might have a little bit of an odd spot here and there. Okay. Not expecting anything major, just making sure that there isn't anything like that. Might put our protection limiter from earlier off.
We did forget about that. Left,
right?
That's
so now at least we know it works.
There we go. It's a little bit of real world testing.
A little bit of real world testing. Alright, and then just lay into it, just make sure there's no funny pinging or anything.
because you're trying to maintain a little bit of the drivability of it as well.
So
It's not a full-out race car that's just going to low.
I like
right.
race cars to start off the key from cold and not have to be revved, nutless. Like I like race cars. Every single one that I've done, they drive like normal cars until you put your foot down. That's the objective.
And I think that was also part of wanting to go with a sort of a plug-and-play solution, was that it would remain drivable. Eyes this way, thanks mate. That would remain drivable, and that you can take it out for that Sunday cruise or something of the sort. Yeah.
And it's got to be economical, it's got to make sense. There's no point nowadays just having a car. If it's a race car and it's a trailer queen, you go to races every month, whatever the case is, by all means. But for street cars, if we want to enjoy it, it's got to make sense.
And that's what I want to do. Yeah, I want to be able to use this on the road, go to meets, be able to daily it almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, you should be able to daily it. There's no reason that having an aftermarket ECU should mean that you can't daily a car.
And I think that's a big misconception that so many people have, and why they're reluctant to go with a standalone ECU.
Look,
it's because it loses a lot of the OEM drivability.
Realistically, you've got to understand that with the new systems, because of the auto-tune, that the ECU is doing so much of the work. There's really the human element's been cut down so much that the margin of error is also cut down. Human error has been cut down. So if you take an old school sort of system, the amount of time that you'd have to spend on a dyno versus a new system, time for time, now let's go straight again, we'll go around the block in traffic and check. Time for time, if you take a millisecond base ECU, you'd have to spend 8 times the amount of time to get into all of the load zones that you can on this sort of system, just by running auto tune and like looking at the data logs and tuning over there. The ECU can analyze the data and make changes a lot faster than what you can. With old school systems, you visually have to look at the RPM or look at the dyno, look at the AFRs, compare a value and action a change. So the amount of time it takes you to analyze that one piece of data versus the ECU does that in like hundredths of a second. So you can process massive amounts of data and action changes and tuning off of that data, where with an old school system you just can't do it.
Fraction of a time, yeah.
So if you took an old school system and you spent 20 hours in a dyno to refine it, you could totally daily it without any issue. And I know a lot of people and a lot of local tuners that are fantastic with the most basic systems and get incredible results and incredible fuel economy. But there, it really does ring true that the system is only as good as the tuner.
Do you think that, because it's machine learning.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
It's machine learning, and do you think that there's almost AI in the future of
definitely,
ECUs?
so definitely, like, there's already an element of that. The only thing is, because we know the result that we're going for, so we can set up a target table and then have the ECU make changes to achieve that target, and that's literally all we're doing. So we're
making the suggestions and we're leaving it to
it's literally that. We're telling it, so instead of telling it to add more fuel or take fuel out, we're telling it what our target air fuel ratio is that we want to achieve, and then we leave the ECU to make the changes until it achieves that target, until it's happy to achieve that target.
So much easier.
And that target's achieved a lot quicker than punching numbers by hand. So unfortunately, the other side of the coin is, with a system like this, once you start adding features, the complexity increases and the amount of stuff that you can tinker with and can adjust increases. So if you take a basic system like one of the local ones, there's only 2 functions, and it's fuel and spark. So there's no sort of trend at refining it. Let's go down there. Where with these sort of systems, you can spend the rest of your life going through it.
So that's a little surgy there.
We'll go through on the data logs and check it like that's noted. So now that's a good example from driving there, first gear, partial throttled, very low speed, and the thing is a little bit jerky. That's one of those conditions that's very difficult to kind of copy on the dyno.
On the dyno, okay.
So that's essentially the sort of stuff that we went out to go and see if it's doing that.
So there is still a place for road tuning.
So the nice thing about it is, like, once you've got the turbo setup done and the AFR is installed and that, like, that sort of thing, you can literally data log on your cell phone and send me the data log, and I can send you a new tune file back, so we can auto tune and fix it off of those data logs, and you can just load the new tune back off of it. So the ability to tune in hindsight off of the data logs is a massive tool, because you're not worrying about live tuning or leaving the ECU to having mad access and like making big changes to the car as you're driving along. You can go through and analyze it afterwards and then make the changes that you deem necessary, and if there's any sort of funny like throttle pump conditions or anything that you don't want to include in the data, you can set up the filters as aggressive as you want, and you can filter out as much noisy data as you want, so that you're only tuning off of appropriate data. Where if you just left it to auto tune constantly as you're driving around, then you're not eliminating any of those noisy
sort of
data
variables.
marks. Okay. And hindsight's a lot easier to just keep that data set very neat. That's as simple as it is.
That is simple.
Well, you can switch off. Let's have a look. Get out of the sardine can and see if we can see what was what.
It wasn't made for men of your stature.
You say that, and like somehow I've got a very big love for them.
I've now been driving the car around for a few days, and I must say I'm very, very impressed with what Quintin and the guys at Core EFI have done. Please do check out the link in the description below to their services, their products. There are a few things that are slightly different from the stock ECU. Starting takes like 2 swings longer, which really isn't the end of the world. It still starts up just great, cold and hot. There are no temperature issues, there's no real drivability issues. There's one small little hole, a slight hesitation. We did try and iron it out while I was still there, but remnants of it remain. But it's one of those things that's easy enough to drive through. It actually really doesn't bother you. It's like 1 set RPM at 1 set load. And that's the sort of thing that we'll tune out in the coming time. The thing is, it has been tuned for everything that is in vacuum, everything below atmospheric pressure. Once we add the turbo, then I'll be able to tune above atmospheric pressure. Revisit the bottom half, of course, but the top half of the table is the only one that really needs work. So I'm suitably impressed. The car drives great, temperature, it's all really, really good. And it's a neat install as well. And I can always revert if I really want to or have to. This gives me a lot of peace of mind going forward. So now we get to go on to the exciting bit, which is hardware. So I can't wait for that. Stay tuned and we'll take you through that process. Maybe not step by step, but we'll take you along for the ride.